everyone, and welcome to Youth Positively Speaking. My name is Paige Ewing, and I work with Prevention Resources as the multimedia specialist for Positive Youth. Prevention Resources is a nonprofit located in New Jersey that is dedicated to promoting health and wellness of individuals, family, and community through education, collaboration, advocacy, and treatment. Today, I have with me Erin Cohen, the project coordinator of Positive Youth, and my co-host.
Thanks, Paige. Again, I'm Erin Cohen, and the Positive Youth Initiative focuses on building countywide capacity to reduce substance misuse for youth ages 9 to 20 in Hunterdon County.
So this episode, we're doing something a little different. You guys might notice, or for those of you listening, you won't hear a expert or even youth on the podcast. And it's because it's our birthday. It's been 1 year since we started the podcast. So we decided to come on and we decided to talk about the last year, all we've learned, all we've done, some of our favorite episodes, and just kind of have like a year in review. I can't believe it's been 24 episodes a year.
I can't believe it. It's so funny, Paige, when I think back to when I said to you, I really want to do a podcast. What do we do to make this happen? And I just think about where we are now and how many episodes we've had and the great conversations we've had with our youth and our experts. And it's just been amazing.
And I think it's funny too, because this whole time we record over Zoom, and we've seen all our guests over Zoom. But now as people are getting vaccinated and as COVID is, lightening up in some areas, we've started, at least Prevention Resources, to have in-person events. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Like when we can record the podcast in person, how is that going to look? So it's funny to see like how over the past year, how we're going to start kind of now changing and evolving a year later.
And I can remember sometime in, I don't know, a few months in, 6 months in of the podcast saying, I wonder if there will ever be a time when we don't have an episode where we talk about COVID.
I know.
Because I feel like it's been this, underlying thing the entire time, because we're, when I look back at that first episode we have, the back to school and COVID-19 and stress and, that whole entire episode, that first episode we had a year ago was talking about COVID-19 and all the challenges it brings.
I know. And to think that now, all the students are back a year later and the stress and anxiety that brings. I mean, it's kind of like we've come full circle. And it's weird. We're kind of in the same spot that we were a year ago, but at the same time, I mean, we've had so many guests and so many people on the podcast and heard so many stories that I know have at least influenced me and our fans who have, told us about the episodes that they love. So it's just
well,
cool
and when you talk
back
about those stories, Paige, remember how our podcast didn't even start out with telling people stories necessarily. Yeah. And then, as time went on and, when my family experienced seeing the woman overdosing when we went to get bagels, and then that idea was born to tell some stories. And I think the stories have been so pivotal for people because they can relate to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that definitely the Stories from the Street segment is probably my favorite episodes, just because it is like those heart-wrenching and sometimes also like empowering stories. And those are the ones that like really get me in the feel place. Like recently we had Remembering Rory. I loved that episode because it made me angry and it made me want to do something. And I know that we've had episodes like that for other people, that it made them angry and they were like, I want to make a change. And I think that's something that's so cool. And like kind of the point of the podcast is having people hear these stories and, hear these data points and everything like that and be like, I want to make a change in my community. I want my community to be better.
Yeah. And I think what the stories have also done is it puts a face and a name to a number. So we know that overdose deaths and, are so high at this point. I think 2020 preliminary numbers right now are like 95,000 people last year died of an overdose. And, so many people have just said things like, oh, they did it to themselves, things like that. But what I think through stories like Remembering Rory, or when we talked to Patty about losing both of her siblings, what I think it's done is brought these faces and these names and these personalities to people, and realizing that they are people, and you
Mhm.
never know why someone may start using something. And so I think it's helping to break that stigma. And I know we had some episodes about that. And I think it's really getting the conversation out there so people realize, oh, okay, so somebody could get hurt or have a surgery and they're prescribed opioids and they become addicted to opioids, but then they can't get pills anymore. And now they're using heroin and now they're gone,
Mhm.
and it makes people realize that they're people just like us, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I've also loved having all of our youth on too, because they just bring such a unique perspective to the issues that we talk about. And, some of them are very close to home of what they deal with every day, stress, back to school. We had the one home for the holidays of what it's been like away at college, and even prom and the rite of passage. And we got some, really great insight into what those prom parties look like. But then we also talk about some issues that maybe don't necessarily we think affect youth, like marijuana use and all these substances that people were kind of like, we're going to talk to kids about that, and we were like, well, yeah, they know more than we think they do.
Mhm.
And so I've loved hearing their perceptions, the stereotypes that they think are true, the myths, the facts, what do they know? So I've
Right.
loved getting to talk to them and just pick their brains. Since that's who we are working with, that's who we're trying to help, is our youth in our community.
Right. And it's funny because I don't know if all of our listeners really understand necessarily why some episodes we have youth on and sometimes we don't have youth on, and really the back the reason that we have this podcast is to it's a prevention podcast where we do talk to youth about candid, issues that are revolving around mental health and substance use. But we also realized that there were just some episodes that we didn't need to have youth on because we didn't feel it to be appropriate. And I don't
Mhm.
know if many people even know that. So we really try to look at, okay, would this be a good episode to have youth on? Would it not be a good episode to have youth on? I'll tell you, one of my favorite episodes with our kids was probably the episode when we talked about high potency THC with Laura Stack,
Yeah.
and we had Sabi and Jasmine on it. And I just
Mhm.
felt like it was such an amazingly powerful episode. And the kids really, they didn't know who Laura Stack was. They didn't know Johnny's story until we kind of just brought it to them. And they looked it up and they just had amazing questions and really wanted to learn so they could talk to their peers about this high THC potency. And actually, I want to tell everybody about a incident that, or not really an incident. I always feel like incident sounds bad. Um, so I always share our episodes on social media, and, people comment or like sometimes, I'm sure some people just scroll on by looking at it. But one time, what the same episode with Laura Stack about the high THC potency, or about the high potency THC.
THC.
Yeah, hello. Um, a friend of mine that I grew up with shared the episode. And this friend of mine has been a self-proclaimed stoner for, 30 years, right? Or
Mhm.
25 years. And I reached out to her and I said, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing this podcast because, high potency THC is really such a concern." And she came back and I just was so stunned. She came back and she said, "Listen, people need to know about this because, I'm a stoner and I've been, smoking pot for years and years and years and years. And when you all were talking about the dabbing, she did a dab and she said it laid her out. She was so high, she just couldn't believe it. And I think what we're trying to do is get people to understand that we're not talking about this pot that you smoked 25 years ago in high school. Well, not you, Paige, because
Yeah.
we always talk about how I was in college when you
25
were
years ago,
born.
I wasn't born. So,
Exactly. But marijuana has evolved, and we're not talking
Mhm.
about that marijuana that used to be, 5% THC or 8% THC. We're talking about marijuana that is been changed, no longer the plant, and is 95% THC. So somebody who has used marijuana all these years could get laid out. What is it doing to our youth?
Yeah. And I think that's what's so crazy about the podcast. I know when we started, we were like, we have this whole Word document of all of our ideas and the dates that they're going to be and the guests we're going to have. And we were like, oh my gosh, we're going to run out of ideas. What are we going to talk about a year from now? Like, we're going to go through it all. Because our second episode was with Diane Litterer from NJPN about marijuana, and we were like, okay, marijuana closed out. That's all we can talk about. And now, a year later, we're having these conversations because it's constantly evolving. We haven't run out of an episode idea yet.
No.
And people are constantly sending them to us. They're like, oh, I really love this. I would love to learn more. And as guests and people come on, it just sparks these ideas of like, this is a great topic. We need to talk about this.
Mhm.
And so I love that we're always, because an episode comes out every other week, we can really stay on what's the hot topic right now,
Mm.
and educate people as things are coming out right in this moment. Because we don't pre-record that far in advance. Usually it's like a week or two. So everything's still current when the episode comes out, which I love because it means that everybody's getting the most up-to-date information that we have.
Yeah, and I do. I'm laughing inside because I'm thinking about how when you said we thought we'd run out of ideas, I can remember thinking, how what are we going to talk about at that time even it was once a month we were going to do it. And now, we have 6 months of ideas right now. And like you
Mm-hmm.
said, we're always just coming up with new ideas because we have such amazing people around us who just come to us and say, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. And, there's been so many of the episodes that I've just loved. It's so hard for me to pinpoint an episode that was my favorite. But I will say, when it was Pride Month, I loved Pride Month because I felt like people were starting to get some understanding of some of the issues that face the LGBTQ community, and talking to our kids on that episode. It was really, I thought, very educational, but it was very impactful for our kids. And it just kind of shows what it looks like it's going to be in the future, because kids are just a little bit, they are okay with things and they're willing to talk about things. It's different than just adults, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I too, it's so hard to pick a favorite because it's just like each one is so unique because of all the different perspectives that come on. But it's like I really loved the prom and rite of graduation because we got some like really like little secrets in there of what it actually looks like. Because even
Yeah.
for me, I graduated high school, what was 6 years ago, something like that now. Um, and I also, I don't know, there's just so many that I've loved having the conversations with our kids and their questions, and just like those moments when they have like a light, like you can see the light bulb go off and they're like, oh, wait, what? That's crazy. When they're talking to our
Yeah.
experts.
I
I
do
love that
re-
moment.
I do remember when Amy was talking to us with Diane Litterer about marijuana, and I remember her talking about, that they should be putting information on the backs of receipts at liquor stores. And I just
Yeah.
thought, wow, this is a 16-year-old kid and she's got ideas. And I
Yeah.
think that's why so many of us want to listen to our youth voices, because they do have so many wonderful ideas and things to say, and what they want to see in their community and what they don't want to see in their community.
And I think that's like the really big benefit of having things like HUIC, the Hunterdon County Youth Coalition. It's an entire coalition of kids coming up with ideas of how they want to improve their schools and their communities.
Mm.
And I think a lot of times because we're like, oh, you're young, you don't have a lot of life experience, we kind of discredit, I guess would be the word, their ideas and opinions. But they know so much. I mean, the internet is so readily available. And if they have a
Yeah.
question, they're just going to look it up. And so I think that they have really, really great ideas. And we've heard those ideas come out on the podcast of great environmental changes that they want to make.
Mhm.
And I think that's such a positive thing. And even with positive youth, I mean, we haven't been able to work with our youth because the schools have been closed, but now as they're opening, I can't wait to get back into the schools and have the lunch groups and, all those events that we've had in the past, to really start getting to the heart of what do the kids need and what do they want.
Yeah, and just to give a background to that is that because a lot of people may not know what these lunch groups are that we're talking about, but what we were doing was going into the schools and talking to kids at lunch, and we brought them in and just kind of talked to them about what are some issues that they felt like they were facing. Now, this is pre-COVID, so obviously COVID was not on their radar at this time. And I can remember all the kids, we just kind of had roundtable discussions, just listening and seeing what they were saying, and we're jotting down all the thoughts that they had. And one of the common things that they just kept talking about that was an issue was phones. And so we had done an entire campaign at this high school, huge high school, on drop your phone and talk at lunch. So they have unit lunch where the entire school has lunch at the same time. And we did this whole campaign about drop your phone at lunch. We gave the kids conversation starters, and we had no idea how it would go. We had
Mhm.
kids tell us that they felt like there was a need for it. The kids actually loved it. They
Yeah.
loved it. And there were quite a few kids that came and told us that they were going to start doing that drop your phone and talk every Monday,
Mhm.
so, and some of them were bringing games in and they were playing games at the lunch table. And, we were going to do that again at the school when COVID hit, right? And
Yeah.
so then what happened? Your means of communication with your friends is the
Your
phone.
phone.
So
Yep.
it's been a little bit different the last 18 months. And, I'm sure now that the kids can see each other in person at school again, they're probably dropping their phones more than they
Mhm.
would have back in early 2020 when we were doing that.
And I even think about, the our vape programs of oh gosh, what did you guys call it?
The vaping program?
Yeah, the one that
Oh,
they handed in all their vapes.
take back your vape.
Thank you. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, what is it called? Because this was pre me before I was hired even.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, that we saw that there was a need and students wanted a way to get rid of their vapes to get quit resources. And now we've installed vape disposal boxes into all the high schools and even some middle schools,
Hmm.
so that students can get quit resources and dispose of them properly, just like we have for adults for medications. And I
Right.
think that's the same thing of just like hearing what is the need and what are the kids actually asking for, because if the kids are asking for it, then they actually want it and they'll actually use it,
Right.
um, which is kind of the whole purpose, the whole point. If you're going to do something, make sure it works.
Yes. Well, and I feel like the other thing that we've really been trying to do with Positive Youth is our help app, getting
Yeah.
all of the kids to download it and families to download it because it has all these resources out there. And especially this year, when we know mental health was such a struggle for so many, there are all the resources on the help app that you can use, to find where to get help. And
Mhm.
I think that if we continue to talk about it, and as Paige was talking about those vape disposal boxes, we even put the help app on the side of the boxes with a QR code, and kids can just scan it with their phone and it'll take them right to the App Store to download it. So, we're just continuing to get that information out there. And I think that's really, the whole point of this podcast is to get information out there to people and hope that it helps someone. And I feel like we've
Mhm.
gotten so much feedback through this past year that our episodes are helping people, even about language. When we had the episode about language, the importance of not using some words or using some words, I think that that is really just how you make change, right? It's really
Mhm.
helpful.
And even the way that we've grown and we've learned by talking to people and going through these episodes. I mean, when we started, I was brand new to the prevention field. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to know what to say. What are the appropriate things? And I think that was so great is this is a judgment free zone. You're going to make mistakes and you're going to say things that are not correct and you're going to fix it and you're going to move on. And so it's cool. We have one coworker who works in the recovery field and she's probably like one of our biggest fans because she
I'm going to
emails
give
us
a shout
every
out to
single
Rocky
time.
because she's listening
Yes,
to this. She always loves listening
absolutely.
to our episodes.
But as we've gone through, it started with a lot of constructive criticism of like, oh, make sure that you say this, don't say this, like, and it was great feedback. And then slowly as we've gone through, her last message to us, she was like, you really get it. Like, thank you so much for getting it. And that to me was just like the biggest compliment that we could have received because we do work really hard to make sure that we're properly representing the communities that we're advocating for, because a lot of the times we're not in that community. And that's why we love having the guests who are so that they can talk about what it's like. And then when they're not here, we can be allies for them. So I've
Right.
loved the growth that we've had over the past year on the podcast.
Well, and you're right, because really, when we talk about, there have been episodes that we're talking about that have nothing to do with prevention. When we're
Mhm.
talking about overdose awareness, when we're talking about recovery, we just talked with Dawn about the spectrums of recovery. That doesn't really have anything to do with prevention per se, but what it does is it kind of shows the whole spectrum of what we do, right?
Mhm.
And so even talking, looking back and when we talk to Penny and when we talk to Karen about ACEs, we're really trying to do this upstream approach of prevention so that maybe we don't need to have folks going into recovery because the problem never got to that point where they had to go into recovery. So I'm glad that we're kind of hitting all aspects of it because it does affect so many people. And,
Mhm.
before we just kind of close out for today, I mean, when I think about the multiple friends of mine, when again, posting our episodes on that have reached out to me and said, I lost my nephew to an overdose. I lost my sibling. What you guys are doing is really awesome. And I think so many people just don't know. They just don't know. So we're touching people. And I think that that's what just helps us keep on going and what makes you and I so excited. As I always say, like, this podcast is my baby. Like we're always like, this is our podcast and we love it so much.
Yeah, and we do. And I can't wait for the next year and all the new things in store. We have a brand new show that's going to be coming out under Youth Positively Speaking called
That's right.
Actions to Avoid Opioid Addiction. And so we are just so excited to see where that show leads us. It'll be more of a mini series, so it won't last for, a year.
Right.
But we are excited to see where that grows and to see where the podcast leads us in one more year from now. So we want to thank you all so much for joining the podcast. 1 year later, happy birthday to us. And as always, for more information about stress, healthy coping skills, marijuana, THC, suicide prevention, overdose, recovery, so many things, please visit our website at njprevent.com/positive youth. And thank you for listening in. We'll see you next time for more Youth Positively Speaking.